Hello, welcome to today's edition of the Academy. Today we're going to continue on through Sun Tzu's chapter 8 of his Art of War. We're only going to cover two sentences today though, sentences 10 and 11. Now it's kind of short for a video, but as far as number of sentences go, but this is one of those segments of the passage that you really need to pick apart because to actually apply it to the tabletop. There's really stuff in here, but when you first read it, you may just skip right over it. So let's just kind of dive in and see if you can figure out what I'm talking about. Hopefully it'll make sense. Alright. So, starting at 10. Reduce the hostile chiefs by inflicting damage on them and make trouble for them, and keep them constantly engaged. Hold out specious allurements and make them rush to any given point. The art of war teaches us not to rely on the likelihood of the enemy's not coming, but on our own readiness to receive him. Not on the chance of his not attacking, but rather on the fact that we've made our positions unassailable. Okay, short to the point. Now, sentence 10 actually has 4 different parts to it. The subject of this is about hostile chiefs, so really looking at governors or leaders of warring factions. But how do you take that and then apply it to the tabletop? And I think you need to kind of separate the fact that he's talking specifically about warring chiefs and talk in terms of the opponent and their command structure and the command. Now, there's 2 elements of command in the tabletop. One is the player, the opposing player, and 2 is essentially his logistics, reserves, his command and control apparatus that's actually represented in the game, if it is. That might be leadership bubbles, that might be area of effect of your ability to activate certain units or what have you. So let's take these individually, the 4 different parts. The first one is inflicting trouble. Now, inflicting damage. One of the commentators talks in terms of the grand strategy kind of thing, where you're actually trying to remove the benefits that your hostile chief might have. I mean, for example, drawing away, hiring away, if you will, luring away their wisest advisors, maybe introducing traitors into the country, stuff like that. But of course, none of that really applies tabletop-wise. But let's look at inflicting damage on, well, both the player, not physically, and then also on his command and control structure. So on the player, you're not going to want to hurt anybody. But the damage you can inflict this is the psychological warfare part of gaming, right? You want to get into your opponent's head a little bit. You can do this in many different ways, and again, so this is a matter of degree here. Tournament, you're going to do more than in a friendly game. Matter of fact, in a friendly game, you might not do it at all. But anytime where you can get them to think that they've got a disadvantage when maybe they really don't, that's a way to do it. It's almost, in a sense, introducing spies, sending them bad information, for example. It could be, in all honesty, a situation where when you are, you see what he's bringing, you take what you have and you kind of deploy it in such a way, or use it in such a way that he doesn't know what to do. He can't leverage the benefits that he's got on the table. For example, if he has this amazingly strong shooting weapon or unit that can do a lot of damage, and you have the option of putting some units on the table, some in reserve, you might only put a handful of units on the table, hidden from that weapon as best you can, and keep the rest in reserve. Now he'll have a turn or 2 where his shooting from that unit is really not that useful. And all of a sudden you come in with the rest of your force, and that way you're kind of protecting it. Get in their head, make them kind of worry, right? Okay. Now, the next one's on inflicting trouble. Now this one's actually easier to apply because Here at Trouble, Two Moves kind of comments on this, and he talks about affecting the opponent's possessions or assets. So think about, what does he consider important? Is it the fact he has a large army? Does he have good control of his reserves, for example? Does he have what advantages does he think he has? And then you want to go in and kind of nullify those, or not necessarily nullify them, but hamper them. So, for example, in some games you have the opportunity to basically influence in a negative fashion the opponent's ability to draw reserves into the table. So right there, you're inflicting trouble on his reserves, right? In other ways, for example, he has this huge army. For example, that might be where he thinks his benefits are, right? And you can counter that with, if it's all ground forces, you can counter that with a lot of flyers, for example. That's trouble, because now, well, how does he deal with the flyers, when he's got this huge ground army kind of thing? This is going to take a lot more thought on your part, because you have to be creative and look at what is the opponent thinking of as his strong assets. Now, these aren't necessarily the strengths of the individual units, but it's almost, what are the synergies? So, for example, I'll use a rule. So there's some in 40K now. There are formations that give you in some cases, some extraordinary powers. Well, some units get these as well, but only if the unit is a max size. So, a unit, for example, a squadron of vehicles, you can buy one vehicle or maybe 3, but you only get this one benefit if you have 3 on the table. Well, the way to inflict trouble is not to necessarily destroy the unit, inflicting damage, but to take out one of those. Now the benefit's gone, that he was relying on potentially. It's the little benefits are weakened, taken away. There's a bunch of different things that it depending on the game system, you need to be very creative here, looking at ways to take what I'll call the buffs that he may have in his army as a whole, and whittle them down, weaken them, make them less of an importance. All right, that's kind of how you inflict trouble. Now, there's the next one is keeping them engaged. Right now, this one's actually very easy to do on the tabletop. Now, remember, we're talking about the hostile chiefs here. You want to keep them engaged. Now, there's another commentator. It sums it up really quick. I want you to think in these terms. To you says, prevent them from having any rest. That's really what you're trying to do. So if the opponent has time to think, they have time to plan, they have time to counter what you're coming up with, right? So what you want to do instead is give him more problems to solve. And they might not even be real threats, but there's something that he has to consider, right? So send a unit quickly somewhere to threaten something that or maybe make it appear like you're trying to do something, and now he has to worry about that, whether you intend to do harm with that unit or not. The more he has to think about, and the more often he has to think about it, and the more things he has to think about, the easier it is for him to make mistakes, because he'll lose track of things eventually, right? And that goes for all of us. So try to keep things simple on your side as possible, but try to throw as much complexity at your opponent in their mind as possible. If never give them a turn where they can kind of relax and have freedom of movement or freedom of fire. You want to make sure that they need to move their units either to seek cover or to finally get into a firing position or maybe get out of line of sight. Make them have to do something. If you're forcing the opponent to do something, again, he has to think about more things. If he has to think about what each unit has to do every single turn, that can be taxing and draining, emotionally draining, mentally draining. And over the course of a game, that may play a significant role in his performance later on. And then finally, on allurements, this is when he says, hold out specious allurements and make them rush on any given point. Now, this is kind of neat, but now he's talking about the grand scheme, grand strategy area, but it ties in very, very well with the idea of the bait idea. Well, here, specious is a word used that means it looks plausible, looks valuable, but really it's not. So you want to offer things to your opponent that look like it's an advantage to him, something he may want to do, even though he really shouldn't, or it's a detriment to him. Again, you're going to have to understand your opponent pretty well. I think if you've followed along through the previous 7 chapters, you'll learn that, or you should have learned that Sun Tzu talks about you need to understand your opponent, the way they think, and then counter that. So in this particular case, you want to focus on what you can give your opponent that would make him do something that he's not maybe normally considering. So maybe he's interested in moving a certain portion of his army forward to a certain point. And you give him, you don't want him to do that or be successful there. You want to give him a reason to move that unit somewhere else. And not necessarily by threatening something, but maybe offer what looks like an advantage to him by having him shift in a different direction. If you allow him to make these mistakes, those compounding mistakes will help you out in the end. This takes a lot of thinking and a lot of pre-planning. This isn't something that, unless you practice a whole lot or really hyper intelligent. I know I'm not in this case. You really have to be able to spot these and understand how your opponent may react to anything, any bait you may put out there. You have to play a mind game to get him to do that. Some of us are going to be good at it, some of us are not. It is a skill that can be practiced, but again, it isn't easy to practice these things in friendly games because you don't want to end up being that guy at the game shop, right? And you do want to be invited back to your friend's house. So I don't know what advice to give you there, but these are the concepts that Sun Tzu is trying to talk about on a grand scale in strategy, and we're trying to narrow it down to how you can apply that to the tabletop. So again, sentence 10 you could have completely ignored had you read through the chapter, but that's something you could do. You can actually apply if you wanted to. Now sentence 11, I want to end here with this concept and really help you focus on it, because the art of war is not about you attacking the opponent and taking him out and expecting he's not going to do the same to you. You absolutely must focus on being prepared for the enemy's attack, either by being able to absorb whatever it is he's about to throw at you, or to put yourself in what he calls an unassailable position, which basically means that your opponent's going to have a very difficult time dislodging you from wherever it is you are on the table. It could be because of terrain. It could be because fortifications, for example. It could be because you have an extremely high morale unit that is very hard to break, and so it's going to soak up a lot of fire, especially if it's kind of hidden in the terrain, and can take a lot of shots without giving up. That's what you're going to be able to weather the attack, because as long as if you're not thinking about weathering attacks that your opponent is going to bring, and all you focus on is planning how you attack your opponent, you are going to fail, because warfare, even on the tabletop, is a manner of give and take. Someone takes the initiative, starts pushing forward, then there's an inevitable counterattack, whether it's physical or for shooting, close to combat or shooting. There's a response, and it ebbs and flows. Sometimes that counterattack becomes a full-scale attack. You need to be thinking in terms of how do I position myself so that those attacks aren't as devastating. So don't just think about what you can do to attack your opponent. Don't rely on that. And you're seeing here, the art of war teaches us the opposite. It's about how do we prepare ourselves to receive the attacks of the opponent so that we can be successful. Okay? So I'll leave you with that. Hopefully you gleaned something from this particular episode. And next week we'll talk about the next 3 sentences and end out the chapter. Okay? Have a good day and enjoy. Please share, like, and subscribe, and comment below and let me know if this made any sense to you or not. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.